Welcome to this introduction to the course Enterprise Systems and Modeling. My name is Paul Johannesson, and in this section I will talk about the basics of enterprise systems, in particular why they are needed, what benefits they offer, and how they are constructed. Before moving into the details of enterprise systems, I would like to point out two major trends that have increased the need for enterprise systems and made them important for almost all organizations. The first trend is decentralization. In the old days, most organizations were heavily centralized. There was a center that controlled all the parts of the organization and where all the important decisions were made. Such a centralized organization can become strong and efficient, but it also easily becomes rigid. It will have difficulties in quickly and flexibly adapting to changes in the environment. Therefore, decentralization has become more and more widespread, and the idea is to break up the organization into smaller parts that are autonomous and can act on their own. These small parts can much more easily react on and adapt to any changes that occur around them. The second trend is globalization. Organizations are no longer restricted to one single country, but can act across the entire globe. This is not only about trading internationally. Companies can also offshore, meaning that they can locate parts of their organization to other countries. They can outsource some of their activities to other companies. For example, IT support that was previously carried out within a company can be performed by another company. Together, decentralization and globalization mean that organizations become much more like networks than hierarchies. They divide and spread out in smaller parts that are linked to each other. Decentralization and globalization provide major advantages in flexibility, adaptation to local markets, scale advantages, and so on. There's no turning back from these. However, there are also disadvantages. In particular, an organization may become so dispersed and so fragmented that it becomes difficult to manage. Management cannot get an overview and understanding of the organization, and it has no effective instruments for implementing changes, because all parts are autonomous and only weakly relate to each other. So, there is a need for counteracting the fragmentation. There is a need for integration. And this is where enterprise systems come in to help. Enterprise systems integrate an organization by means of its information system. And this presentation will be very much about integration, but first we need to look at some basic concepts. In order to see how the activities of an organization can be integrated, we will look at two ways of structuring and organizing activities. The first one is through functions, where a function is a unit in an organization that carries out a set of related activities. Typically, these activities require some special competence or equipment that make it natural to put them together within one function. Here is a simple example of some functions in a university department. There is a systems administration function that takes care of computer hardware, software, and users. The people working there all have a certain competence, and they make use of similar equipment. The competence needed in the systems administration function is quite different from that needed by the janitors, which are put into another function. There may also be functions for course registry and for teaching. And this example illustrates that within a function, people have very similar competence and use the same equipment, but between functions, both the competence and equipment may vary a lot. We will continue by looking at some generic functions that exist in almost all organizations and how information systems can support these functions. In the marketing and sales functions, information systems can support sales campaigns, sales analysis, market analysis, etc. One recent important kind of information system in this function is the CRM system, Customer Relationship Management. The background here is that large organizations often become impersonal and have difficulties in adapting to individual customers. Suppose, for example, that one day you call a company and order some products. The next day you call and want to change your order. You will then talk to another employee this time who doesn't know about your previous order, so you have to repeat a lot. After some time, when your goods have not yet been delivered, you call again and ask what have happened, and you will talk to a third employee who doesn't know about your previous contacts. All these new employees and you have to repeat yourselves, and this results in bad customer service. And in order to address these kinds of problems, organizations have introduced CRM systems that register all interactions that a customer has had with a company, and the CRM system makes these interactions easily available to other employees so they can serve the customer in a more knowledgeable and personal way. Information systems can be used in manufacturing and production, for example, systems for quality control, warehouse management, production planning, and so on. All organizations, except the smallest ones, need information systems for handling the finance function. Such systems provide information for decision support, but also help to handle accounting, order management, accounts payable, and many other financial activities. Almost all organizations also have information systems for managing their human resources. The basic example is a system for payroll. A slightly more advanced example is a competence database, which includes information about the education, background, experience, etc. of employees in an organization. Such a database can be helpful for identifying people with the right competence when starting up new projects in the organization. Well, we have now looked at functions, which is a way of structuring activities in an organization from an internal perspective, from within, so to say. We look at competences and equipment needed and structure the activities accordingly. But there's also another perspective, an external perspective. Here we look at the activities from the perspective of a customer, and we lump together activities that produce value for the customer. In this case, we talk about business processes, which can be defined as sequences of activities that result in value for a customer. The simple figure here illustrates the idea. First, we produce a small part of a car, then we produce some more of it, and finally we have produced the entire car. Then we have carried out activities that have resulted in something that is valuable for a customer. We have completed a business process. So, through business processes, we structure activities from an external perspective, from a customer perspective, and we lump together activities that produce value for customers. Here is another example. A course can be viewed as a process, as it produces something that is of value for the customers, that is, the students. A course will require that several functions are involved. The system's administration must ensure that the computer network is up and running. Janitors have to handle facilities. The course registry function will register students and their grades. Finally, teachers will provide lectures, supervision, examination, and other teaching services. So, the course process crosses all these functions. Generally, processes in an organization are interrelated to each other, and one framework for showing these relationships is Porter's value chain. The basis of this chain are the primary activities, which produce value for a customer by moving products closer to her. This is a natural way of thinking for a goods-producing company, where we start with some raw material, make it into some goods, and sell it to customers. In other words, we go from procurement all the way to sales and customer services through inbound logistics, operations, and outbound logistics. This results in a chain of activities taking raw material and successively transforming them into products for the customer. We move from left to right, and all the way we produce something that becomes more and more valuable for the customer. There are also support activities that support the primary activities by maintaining an infrastructure, for example financial management, human resource management, and infrastructure management. Value chains exist within one company and describe how activities there are organized in related processes. But we can use a similar idea also between companies and talk about supply chains, which are sequences of processes that span different companies. Porter's value chain is quite natural for a goods producing company, but it becomes less so for service providers. For such a company, the activities cannot easily be structured in the linear fashion of a value chain. An example could be an architect who together with a customer produces drawings for a new building. The activities of the architect are customer-centric. The customer is in the loop all the time. The activities cannot be made linear in advance. They are much more ad hoc and dynamic, depending on the needs and requirements of the customer. Furthermore, the architect will need to cooperate with many other partners who may also directly interact with the customer, for example, construction engineers. In situations like these, the sequential value chain or supply chain doesn't really help to organize activities. Instead, we get a value net where actors are more loosely related to each other. Now, returning to functions. It's quite common that the IT systems of an organization have been built to serve the individual functions. There's one IT system for personnel, another IT system for R&D, a third for market and sales, and so on. Each of these systems may do a very good job in supporting its function, so every function may be quite happy about it. However, the situation may not be ideal from the perspective of the entire organization. The problem is about processes that span several functions. These processes would also need their own IT support, but they don't get it. For example, when one function has done some job in the process and it's about to hand over to another function, there's no IT support for handling this, because every IT system has been developed in isolation. We would need that individual systems were integrated with each other so that they together could support the processes. And this is where ERP systems come in.